What's up, everyone? Welcome into DodgerHeads presented by DodgerBlue.com. My name is Jeff Spiegel, joined once again by Justin Lorber, aka Future Dodgers. Here this time to talk about just farm system, a lot of prospect stuff. You do preseason rankings. We've had a couple months of data now, some guys getting promoted, demoted, struggling, succeeding, all that kind of stuff. So I'm excited to dive into this. As always with Justin stuff, you can check out FutureDodgers.com. He hasn't gotten his midseason stuff up yet, but stay tuned there because there's tons of great content once deadlines, trade deadline, that kind of stuff happens. Justin's the guy you're going to want to go to see where those guys ranked, at least heading into the season. So let's just start big picture, Justin, as we talk about the Dodgers farm system. I was going back and looking at your preseason rankings. I want to read you the guys you had as your top 10 and give you a thought to just a second to respond to this. Rushing, DePaula, Ryan, Pages, Cartaya, Lorenzo, Hurt, Sweeney, Joendry Vargas, and Gavin Stone. Those were your top 10 Dodgers prospects coming into the season. When you hear that list rattled off, give me your immediate reaction.
Wouldn't change a thing. All right.
There you go. There you go.
Yeah, I mean, I think if you're looking at the top at Rushing and DePaula, nothing to change there, nothing to complain about there. Both of them have continued to develop. Those, for me, as it stands right now, still the top two prospect eligible players in the system. You keep going down. River Ryan has been hurt. There's not a whole lot you can do there. He was a guy who starts off the year at AAA. Maybe he gets one of these calls for a spot start instead of Justin Wrobleski or a Landon Knack. Instead, he spent most of the first couple months on the IL. Andy Pages, though, now in the majors, I think he might have exceeded prospect eligibility too. So you have a couple guys
he's got to be close.
Yeah, Pages and Stone, who contributed to the major league team. Kyle Hurt in that bucket a little bit. He's also been injured. So it's a real kind of grab bag of, going down a little bit, staying steady, going up a little bit, playing in the majors, getting hurt, and so on.
Yeah, no, I look at that list and the two names that jumped out to me were Pages. You had fourth, and I'm like, man, Justin held on to his Pages stock, and a total vindication the season we've had, because the amount of people that thought, A, he could even come back from the shoulder injury, or B, that he would come back this quickly, for him to have made it to the major leagues and been pretty successful, I think is a testament to him, and kudos to you for leaving it number 4. On the flip side, I joked with you right before coming on, I'm sure there's lots of people that wish they could go back to their 2023 prospect rankings of Gavin Stone and hold on to that, because obviously 2023 was kind of a mess for him. He comes back into this season a little bit more of a mystery, and yet all of the hype and hope that maybe existed for a guy like Gavin Stone the year prior, he seems to have kind of cashed in on it. Is that like a fair assessment? Like if I told you a year ago this was going to be Gavin Stone's type of performance, it feels like 12, 18 months ago, people would have been like, yes, that fits what I'm expecting.
I think even further. And so let me start with Pages. Do not give me too much credit. I was very skeptical of his ability. Maybe not long term. I've always been a big Andy Pages fan. If you go back and if you watch some of these videos that we've done like a couple years ago, I've always been a big Pages guy. I'm very glad to see him doing what he's doing. I did not think he'd be able to come back that quickly. Power hitter coming back from a shoulder injury, serious shoulder injury. In the first year back, it's just not what you see. He was great in spring training, tore up AAA, has, held his own a little more than in the majors, playing center field, weighted runs created plus just above 100, about a league average hitter. Hard to ask for much more for a guy coming off of a major shoulder surgery. He's been great. I think I kept him at 4, maybe more out of a sense of loyalty than anything else. But glad to see him doing what he's doing. And that will probably end up being his last ranking in my rankings. Yeah. Gavin Stone, you go back maybe 2 years ago, there were people who I talked to who had him above Bobby Miller.
Yep.
Back when the debate was between Gavin Stone or Bobby Miller, they were both kind of right there with each other. Last year, it was very clear, who was the better prospect, better pitcher, whatever you want to call it. This year, though, obviously Miller's had some injury issues. Yeah, I mean, I think I just bought, or I know there was a little bit of a narrative of like, he was dealing with injury issues. It wasn't all there. And I think I kind of just didn't buy the narrative
Yeah.
because it seems like certain players you are sold like a narrative from the organization. And this isn't just true of the Dodgers, true of any team about why a certain player underperformed. And yeah, Strone, it looks like it was absolutely true.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
good for him. He has, stayed in the majors as an effective starting pitcher. Not an easy thing to do for a young player, even ones who've been successful.
Right.
They have their ups and downs. Kudos to him.
Yeah. You had him as number 4, I believe, heading into the 2023 season. He's kind of living up to that sort of potential after, again, a year with some legitimate excuses, it sounds like. Let me ask you a couple more big picture questions. 3 of them. I'll get to a couple specific guys. And then I want to talk about Dodgers and their ability to develop hitters. That's been a big conversation on our show and social media. But who's a guy maybe since you first did your rankings at the beginning, your preseason rankings, is there a name or two that you think is going to be a big riser the next time you get to kind of updating this ranking list?
Yeah, there's a few. I think Alex Freeland probably near the top of that list. He's had a huge breakout. Started the year at high A, weighted runs traded plus over 200. Was quickly promoted to double A, where even in the last month where he's been around like the 115 range, overall double A, about 140, increased power. He's always been a guy who gets his walks. Yeah, I mean, this kind of offensive explosion was like nothing we'd seen from him so far in his professional career, and even his college career. He did not dominate to this level. So he's a guy who will absolutely move up. Zahir Hope, who's been injured, he came over in the Michael Busch trade, was the second prospect along with Jackson Barris, who himself has been hot of late. In the couple dozen, maybe 2 dozen games, I don't know the exact number, that he played at low A, really showed why some people thought, like, if this trade is going to be really lopsided, it might be because Zahir Hope should not have been like a second piece of this kind of deal. It shouldn't have been, Ferris for Bush and Almonte for Hope. Some part of that is imbalanced. He's been great. He'll move up for sure. Pitchers, Peter Hubeck has finally started to realize some of this potential. I was a big Hubeck fan when they drafted him back in 2021. The development has been a little bit slow, but he's really had a breakout year this year. It seems like it's all kind of coming together for him. Justin Wrobleski, a name that probably a lot more people know now, has had a big breakout. Ben Kasparius is taking a step forward. Chris Campos is taking a step forward. Yeah.
Love it. Love it. Let's go the flip side. We're going to talk Wrobleski here in a minute. Let's talk fallers. Are there guys that, you never want to sort of make grand proclamations? Again, to your point, like Zahir Hope, I think it's 18 games he's played this season. Some of these guys, it's hard to really have changed your opinion on in such a short sample size. Some guys, though, we have a whole first half. Are there guys that maybe you foresee dropping, maybe not substantially, but relative to where they started pretty significantly from the beginning of the season?
Yeah. I mean, Trey Sweeney is probably an easy one there. I've mentioned before when we've talked about him, huge fan of his when he was in the draft, really wanted the Dodgers to take him. He didn't get there. Trade for him in the offseason. He had like an okay, maybe not outstanding minor league career so far. It wasn't like a big name prospect after being a first round pick. But maybe new organization, moves up to AAA, Pacific Coast League, the big offensive environment. And it just hasn't come together for him. Looked like a guy who, there's a shortstop need in the organization. You got to shift Mookie over to play there. And he's the guy, kind of at the top of that organizational depth chart when it comes to prospects because he's in AAA. Maybe he's the guy who rises at some point during the 2024 season, takes the job. Hasn't come together like that for him. Yeah. He probably falls down. Yeah.
Cartaya, I mean, he's the other name that jumps out. He's such a confusing guy to know what to do with. Obviously, he gets promoted to AAA, and yet we haven't really seen the offensive numbers bounce back. So I don't know if you would agree, but he feels like one of these guys that, you had him at the beginning of the year. It looks like still inside that top 5 at 5th. It seems like some prospect people had already dropped him maybe a little bit below that, but I don't know. From my perspective, Justin, it's hard to imagine that he stays in the top 5, even top 7 in a lot of these lists, just because the extended period of struggles seems to be continuing.
Yeah, for sure. And he is, he's on the 40-man roster. He already had one option year last year. This is his second option year. Next year will be his last option year, because I don't think right now the projection is that he's going to start the year in the majors next year. So yeah, there's somewhat of a time clock that's going off. And now he's 22.
Yeah.
He's not an old player. We're not talking about like a 26-year-old who's, spent 8 years in the minors. He's 22 and he's a catcher. Catchers, might develop a little slower offensively. But you've got this 40-man clock where like you can't have him run out of options, essentially. And so that's why he's being pushed to AAA, even though there wasn't this kind of extended period of outstanding performance at AA. Even though he did hold his own there, especially compared to last year in the first part of this year. So yeah, I think we need to see more from him for AAA, but yeah, sometimes guys just don't develop, especially catchers. There's a long history of outstanding offensive catchers who just don't ever fully develop. I would not close the book on him yet, though. I think the tools are still there. He's still too young. I wouldn't completely write him off.
Great dude, by the way. Super nice, super friendly. When I was down in Reno meeting with some of the guys from OKC, super good dude. So I'm rooting for him. Let me ask you about a couple guys specifically, and then we'll talk maybe some guys who will pop. You mentioned Justin Wrobleski, 13th ranked prospect in the organization by you heading into the season. This is a guy that beginning of last year was 22, mid-season he was 18, up to 13 this past 18 months. Obviously, a guy makes his major league debut. I think sometimes as fans, we can look at a prospect ranking list as like the guys who are closest to the major league level and say, oh man, well, this guy was 13th. How did he already make it to the major leagues ahead of some guys who are ahead of him? Whereas just because you make it to the major leagues doesn't mean you deserve to be higher on these prospect lists. So for you, Wrobleski, he was 13th coming in, left-hander, throws 100 miles and touched 100 miles an hour this season. Is this a guy that if you were to redo your rankings now would be much higher than 13th? Based on what we've seen and kind of that's a reflection of the fact that he's made it to the major leagues? Like that's the reason he's made it to the major leagues already?
Yeah, for sure. He would be higher. There's no question there's been a step forward. You mentioned the velo bump. He wasn't always throwing 100 miles an hour. And he spent, I don't actually remember like in this moment if he ever got promoted to AA last year. But for a while, it seemed like he's throwing 6 innings at high A. Like he's getting whiffs. And it wasn't like he was super young. He was a little bit on the older side. Why shouldn't he be promoted to AA? And it was kind of waiting for that. And of course, this year dominates at AA, moves up to AAA, makes the spot start. So yeah, it's a little bit of a surprise, but still a very talented guy. We talked at the start of the season, the strength of this system was kind of the upper level pitching depth. And he was very much a part of that. Now, there were also a lot of other guys who were part of that who had to get hurt or underperform in order for him to kind of get that chance in the major leagues. Nick Brasso was hurt. River Ryan was hurt. Emmett Sheehan, who's not a prospect anymore, was hurt. Bobby Miller, not a prospect anymore, was hurt, and other injuries at the major league level. But yeah, he was a part of that group of upper level minor league pitchers that was the strength of the system entering the year.
Yeah, and you nailed it, by the way. 2023, he made 25 appearances at high A, and that was it. So for a guy to have been in high A last year and to make it all the way to the major leagues this year is a pretty crazy transition, considering, in 2022, he was in rookie ball and then A ball. And so for him to move from high A to AA to AAA all in, and then to the major leagues in one season, really impressive stuff. One other name I want to run by you. It's a guy I know you really like, and it's Edgardo Enriquez. There was a report from John Morosi that popped up in the last few days as we approached the trade deadline that he is, quote, a name to remember. Morosi points out he's earned 2 promotions already this season. He has 59 strikeouts in 33 innings pitched. Obviously a reliever only, it appears. He was 35th on the prospect rankings coming into this season. It feels like he's one of these guys that everything he has done since has just been like blowing people's minds within the Dodgers organization and people who follow prospects. So give me what you've got on Edgardo Enriquez.
Yeah, so let's flash back to, over a year ago. I don't know the exact date. Enriquez is developing. He's looking good. Tommy John surgery. He was probably one of the more promising young arms in the system at that point. Gets Tommy John surgery. It's out for a year. And this year is his Rule 5 year. So he is Rule 5 eligible at the end of the year, which is why I think he was transitioned from a starter to a reliever is, you can fast track relievers a lot more easily than you can fast track starters. Justin Wrobleski, also a guy who came back from Tommy John surgery, and you saw the kind of slower development path there that you just mentioned. Edgardo Henriquez, if he's a starter, I don't think he's still in double. I don't think he's in Double A right now.
Yeah,
but he's a reliever. He's Rule 5 eligible. They want to see, do we have something here? Is this a guy that we might want to add to the Rule 5 or to the 40-man roster, protect him from the Rule 5 draft at the end of the year? You mentioned also he might be a trade piece. The guy who throws triple digits, hammer breaking ball. As a reliever, he is a very legit relief prospect. Probably a good argument that he's the best relief only prospect in the system right now. And I mean, this is, he's at Double A. I don't know how much higher he'll climb this year, but the stuff is very legit, and he'll go as far as the stuff will take him.
Yeah, you mentioned, I mean, it was December of 2022 is when he ends up having that Tommy John surgery. So we're only 18 months removed for him to have had the success that he's had. 22-year-old, 6'4", 200 pounds, 2.45 ERA on the season this year with 59 strikeouts in 33 innings pitched. So look, we're talking about guys. I mean, he could be a trade piece, as John Morosi mentions, and you would imagine that there's some value there, and the timing makes sense. If he's a guy that needs to be added to the 40-man roster, we know how much the Dodgers value those 40-man roster spots. You could also make the case, it sounds like, I know he's only at Double A now, but with that type of velocity, that type of breaking ball, to me, I don't know. I mean, it doesn't seem like a 0% chance this is a guy who could even get a sniff of the major league level at this point, just to see what happens if you're the Dodgers and say, well, we got to add him to the 40-man roster in the offseason anyways. So it doesn't really cost as much to add him to the 40-man roster in the next couple of months. So, I mean, am I crazy? Do you think there's a greater than 0% chance that Henriquez makes his major league debut at some point in 2024?
Yeah, greater than 0. There's also a slightly greater than 0 chance that I make my major league debut in 2024. I would put that at about 0.000. Anyway, greater than 0, lower than 15.
Okay.
How about that?
Okay. Move on. Let's move on to a couple other guys. Who are some other names that maybe we haven't seen the performance yet? Like maybe there isn't a box score to point to, or an ERA, or a home run total to point to, but guys that you just have a sense, maybe you've heard some things about, or just have seen some inklings of performance that, hey, in 6 months, preseason rankings, 2025, some guys that you think might pop in the next, few months.
It's funny because a lot of the guys that I would have said at the start of the year, guys like Wrobleski, guys like Peter Hubeck, even maybe Henriquez to a certain degree, they have popped. So it is somewhat of a tough answer. I am going to say Jake Geloff, who got your second round pick for last year, and he had a phenomenal start to the year in Low A. I think the level just wasn't really a challenge for him. He was walking over 20% of the time. Power hitting third baseman, been up to High A, and now he's facing an actual challenge. His walk rate is cut in half, striking out a little bit. I'd say give him time to develop, but probably from last year, one of my favorite picks they had, grid value in the second round, and somewhat of a unique archetype in this system, kind of like the power hitting third baseman, at least for someone taken that high. You think like Cody Hosey, Jake Geloff. Dodgers typically don't go for like the power hitting corner infielder archetype that early in the draft that often.
Yeah. Okay, so Geloff, I like it. Well, let's transition that perfectly then into a conversation I wanted to get your thoughts on. A conversation we've had on our show as we've looked at the Dodgers kind of, in some ways, inability to fill some holes in the major league roster at the bottom of the order in particular with homegrown, developed hitters. And the question is basically, are the Dodgers overrated at developing hitters? There's this belief even amongst players, when I talk to the guys down in Oklahoma City, that, hey, this is the best organization to come to develop as a player, pitcher, hitter. But when you look at it, the pitchers have developed. They've moved up through the system. They've found success. Guys like Gavin Stone, Landon Knack, Emmett Sheehan, they've found success at the major league level. Bobby Miller, of course. But on the hitting side, it's been a little bit more mixed. And I'm curious to kind of hear your sense. So here's sort of the background. Basically, Will Smith was drafted in 2016. And since 2016, some people would say is the only guy that the Dodgers have drafted and developed successfully. Some other guys since then, Gavin Lux, who, again, is not having a good year this year. Jaron Kendall, who never made it. Cody Hosey, first-round pick, never made it. Michael Busch, we can talk about him. Vogel was a high schooler in 2020. Dalton Rushing hasn't made it to the major leagues. Alex Freeland, Jake Geloff, both from 2023. Guys that you've mentioned, or at least Geloff was. I don't know. Freeland might have been 2022. Kendall George, 2023. He was a high school kid. They have had some later round guys like Johnny DeLuca was a draft and develop guy who's made it to the major leagues. James Outman, who nobody seems to like at the moment. I also think it's fair to include some international free agents in this conversation because those guys get developed as well. However, Luis Rodriguez, Yeiner Fernandez, Wilman Diaz, Jesus Galiz, these were all very highly rated international free agents in 2019, 2021, who, while much younger and still, a couple of years away, haven't developed and become elite prospects as maybe expected. So that's the backdrop. I'll let you go wherever you want. The idea that the Dodgers are overrated at developing hitters and actually aren't very good at it. What's your thoughts?
Overrated? I mean, potentially, if we're saying they're the best organization at developing hitters, maybe. I don't think I would call them bad at it. As far as the draft track record goes, and even you include the international players, it's somewhat like, how do you define that question? Like, are you developing major league hitters? Because they've developed a bunch of guys who've hit throughout the minor leagues. Gavin Lux was the top prospect in baseball for a while. Miguel Vargas has been at AAA in multiple years and has torn it up. And now in a pretty small sample size, even though he didn't do great last year, you're starting to see the offensive results come through this year. Andy Pages has been a slightly above average major league hitter
as a rookie
in the majors this year while playing center field. That's a valuable player. If you can have a guy who's a league average offensive player while playing center field, that's a valuable piece to have on your team. James Outman last year was worth multiple wins. I don't think very many people saw that coming. I certainly didn't. He was a 7th round pick.
Yeah.
It's been reported, he's talked about how, he's completely changed his swing from when he was drafted in their development system. So they have, and of course, Michael Busch, who was developed in the system, spent a bunch of time at AAA, was traded, and is now killing it in the majors.
Yeah.
So they've developed guys. I think where the tension is, how do you get guys from talented prospect at AAA to impact major league player? And it happened with Outman, last year, despite some of the struggles this year. Gavin Lux, before the ACL tear, was a valuable player.
Yep.
And so I think part of it is, hitting development's not easy. Prospect development's not easy. I wouldn't say there are a ton of teams that are just churning out impact quality starters. Like how many teams are there realistically that are overflowing with position player talent at the major leagues that they've all developed, homegrown? Not that many, not sure if any. So in some sense, they have a reputation of being so good, and then they are held to that standard, which makes it difficult. We're looking at a small number of players of guys who've gotten to AAA, they've been impact prospects, and it hasn't transitioned yet to the major leagues at a consistent level. And then you're also looking at the, quote unquote, failed prospects, the guys who were rated highly as international players, who were drafted highly and just didn't develop. That, frankly, every team has those, especially with the international players. When you're signing guys at 16 years old, the development path to ages, 23, 24, 25 is tough to project. Just because someone's rated, top 5, top 10 as an international player when he signs at 16, wouldn't necessarily hold that against him, because they've also had international players who weren't very highly rated break out. Josue De Paula, Theron Lorenzo, a couple of the more recent ones, Miguel Vargas, Andy Pages. You want to go back a little further. None of those guys were top of the class international players. Keibert Ruiz, also not a top of the class international player. And I know hitting isn't exactly his strong suit with the majors, but he's a major league player.
Yeah.
So they might be a tad bit overrated, but that's also in part because of what they are rated as, how people view them, the perception of they're the best organization. They might not be. And it's probably, they probably need one or two other of these pieces to really develop into impact major league players. I don't know whether you count Michael Busch in that. That's kind of subjective. But if you want to retain that reputation, you got to continue the Seager, Bellinger, Will Smith. Those guys got to keep coming, and they haven't, at least the last couple years.
Yeah. And that's why I think the term overrated is I would say a fair term, because if you're saying they're the best, it's hard to justify that over the last 5 or 6 seasons. Now, I think there's lots of caveats to that. One being, you have to keep in mind that if you're comparing them to other teams, not drafting in the top 20 to 25 in almost any of these drafts makes it really, really hard to go find the studs. If you go look at the track record of guys drafted at the top of the draft, it's, at some point there's a cliff. You don't get to sniff the Adley Rutschmans of the world when you're drafting where the Dodgers draft, the Gunnar Hendersons of the world. So that makes it a little bit trickier.
I have one contend to it, and I was thinking Gunnar Henderson as you said this, because they were linked to him in the 2019 draft. They had 2 picks. They had 2 first-round picks. They had 25. They had 31. They took Cody Hosey with 25, Michael Busch with 31. They were heavily linked to Gunnar Henderson. They did not take him. And look, it's you can play that game with every single pick in every single draft. They should have taken this guy. They should have taken this guy. But that one I will throw, because Holiday would not have been available to them. Gunnar Henderson, though, developing into a superstar, he would have been, and maybe they were interested. Who knows?
Yeah, slip there. But my point is, if you're drafting later in the first round, on the whole, even though Gunnar Henderson is an exception to this, it's harder. And even also keeping in mind that they've spent a lot of their high-end draft capital on pitchers. And then you go through, Lux is the guy I mentioned. He has a torn ACL. We don't know what his career looks like if not for that. Jaron Kendall, there were massive concerns and questions about the hit tool when he was drafted. That's why he fell. It kind of backfired. Cody Hosey's kind of one of those ones that I think you point to and say, man, it felt like the bat was going to translate, and then it didn't. And then Michael Busch, I joked with you right before coming on, Michael Busch is the one that everybody on all sides of this argument wants to point to, because the people who say the Dodgers are bad at developing talent are like, well, look, he never made it as a major leaguer for the Dodgers, and therefore it doesn't count. Whereas I would say, yeah, but if the whole question is about their ability to draft and develop, they draft and literally developed him for years and years and years, and now he's hitting at the major league level. Then you've got, again, high school kid Vogel in 2020, weird draft anyway. So I think I would land, Justin, on that they are overrated. They're not the best at this, but to point to all those people and act like they're one of the worst in the league at this, I think is a massive disservice. A, because we're far less experts, at least I am, at what everybody else is doing, but B, because you have to take into account where they're drafting, what their international free agency budget is, and that kind of a thing. And the last piece is the Dodgers don't really have room for guys who might develop into, slightly valuable major league players. Those guys typically don't make it in the Dodgers organization, because the Dodgers end up looking for, hey, if you're not going to be an everyday starter, the quad A guys tend to fizzle out in the Dodgers organization. I'm thinking about a guy like Luke Raley, and then he goes to another place and finds a little bit of success. So I think there are some factors there, but I've kind of landed in overrated is fair, but let's not get carried away and get to a point where they think where we're saying that the Dodgers are bad at this.
Yeah, I think you brought up Luke Raley. He's a good example of wasn't really room for him with the Dodgers. He gets a little runway somewhere else, and he continues to develop.
Yeah.
And those kind of opportunities are not as available with a team that is consistently in first place, that's in the playoffs every year, that kind of demands, a team that can win and players who can support winning. And that isn't always the most conducive place for development.
Yeah. I mean, as we're
Example
recording
B,
this,
Michael Bush.
yeah. Well, and I was going to say, as we're recording this, another interesting name is just within the last day or two, Yorvit Vivas gets called up and gets his shot with the Yankees. And again, this is a guy that was sitting on the Dodgers 40-man roster for it felt like forever. He ends up getting moved because they didn't really have room for him. But, he's having a pretty, 828 OPS at AAA. So I'm not trying, like, up until the end of 2023, he was a Dodger. So if Yorvit Vivas ends up being good, like, do the Dodgers get credit for developing him, or do we wipe it all away? I think it's a complicated question, but the reason I ask is because I think it's a fun one. So I appreciate your insight and your thoughts there, Justin. That'll do it for this one. Again, we appreciate everybody joining us. If you missed it, Justin did an MLB draft preview, a futures game preview, and also we're going to have some MLB draft after the draft content coming at you in the next couple of days. So make sure you check that out and stay tuned for that as well. But you can check out Justin at Future Dodgers on social media, futuredodgers.com. Again, thanks for joining us. Check out DodgerBlue.com, DodgerBlue1958 on social media. We will see you all soon. As always, go Dodgers.